everybody. This is MRAH and Rosenbaum Are Humans, a production of the Speculative Literature Foundation. I'm Marianne MRAH.
I am Benjamin Rosenbaum.
There we go. And
Or at least
today,
Benjamin Rosenbaum is one of the processes that I'm running inside my brain currently.
which leads us into our topic for today, AI part 3 and 4, I guess. So, Ben was going to catch us up on what we talked about last time. So,
well, I'm going to recap because it's fresh in my mind since I just listened to I was just editing it, or Darius is editing it. I'm just rubber stamping his excellent edit. But part 1 was AI. What did we dream about it? What did we grow up with thinking it was? What do we want it to be? What do we imagine it is? And part 2 was, wait, what did we just make?
Yeah.
Some weird shit. The upshot of which was not another human self that lives in a box, but also not just a trivial thing that predicts the next word, and that's not very interesting. We made a weird, interesting thing that opens up a whole can of worms.
Yes. And then we were going to talk today about a couple aspects of how that plays out in life, I guess, right now, in this moment.
The economic, social, ethical implications. We held ourselves back last time from saying, from diving into but will it take our jobs and so on.
And I think I can sort of break it down a little bit more. I think the ethics are in some ways very straightforward. Maybe we can do that one first. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about like how it is manifesting in the classroom right now. And because it's interesting, I think, from very
I don't know if I think the ethics are straightforward. I guess it depends on where the line. I don't know where the line is between.
Well, we'll find out.
Ethics.
We'll find out. Yeah. And then, but I almost feel like we need the ethics conversation to bracket everything else, right? To like, and then is it coming for our jobs, et cetera. That's my proposed schedule for that. All right. So
wait, it's coming for our jobs as third? Anyway, you go. I'll just jump in.
So ethics. I'm jumping into the ethics. So where this, I don't know, you were probably more aware of this as a programmer than I was, right? So when I first ran into all of this, it was in the context of Midjourney and artists being very concerned. And it was probably a couple of iterations into Midjourney before I really even noticed it. So, and I'm not sure where it is now, but I want to say Midjourney version 3-ish or something like that was the one that came to my attention. And this is where we started seeing all of these, people were putting in prompts to get, photos of themselves as science fiction characters or whatever else and having fun with it. And then the artists were saying, hey, this is all based on stolen material. Please stop using it. So, and then where it's gone from there is, well, the tech has gotten better. So the early stuff, everyone I think knows about the fingers and the hands being really, really off early on. It's getting better at that stuff, and it will presumably continue to get better very fast is my guess. So I don't know if you have a sense of that, like if there's going to be a point soon where we won't be able to tell. Right now, my artist friends can Francesca Myman is a great person to follow on Facebook, and social media, because she is a traditional artist, works in digital media, and has been doing, she recently did the cover of Locus magazine. She does them fairly often, and she did a whole breakdown of what she did not using AI to do the cover. But I was struck by the fact that she said Locus was probably going to have to include a statement in the editorial letting people know that this wasn't made by AI because it looks like it was made by AI, right?
That is going to be a thing. I love that. I love that. That is just as it take. I mean, I'll let you go on, but I just want to take this wonderful tangent. Whenever there's a disruptive technology, like the way that people. Auto-tune was originally pitched as a way that you couldn't. There was this moral panic around you won't be able to tell the good singers from the bad singers anymore. In fact, maybe that's true, but actually, two things happen when you introduce something like auto-tune. One is it's also true of the photograph, but when you introduce auto-tune, one is people like my daughter who really care about vocal quality start doggedly watching live performances bootlegged videotaped on YouTube to see when they hit the high notes, if they're really, or like acoustic unplugged. There's a bunch of showing off and like, no, I'm really doing it's a bunch of ways you could, there's moments where the fact that they flub and do something that's different than the backing track shows her that actually they're really singing and they can't hit that note. Anyway, there's all that kind of thing. And then of course there's also the way in which autotune starts being used artistically, and people intentionally make overt autotune sounds that sound very like, you couldn't, it becomes a thing to play with. Similarly, like people paint like the way photographs work, you know what I mean? Like there's two reactions. One is to paint in a way that's super like the sort of photorealistic school of painting that has like, lens flares and reflections and everything that you wouldn't do if you were just painting the way humans see. You're intentionally mocking a photograph. And then, cubism and impressionism and whatever or Presum's a little early, but like Dadaism, everything that the camera can't do. And so, yes, I expect to see all of those reactions, people doing whatever it is that Midjourney turns out not to be able to do, and also people intentionally doing handmade art that looks just like Midjourney is like such a thing that humans would do in this kind of a historical moment.
And I don't think she's doing it to make it look like Midjourney. She's showing how you do this as an artist technically without using AI, but pointing out that for the untrained eye, it's going to look like AI right now. So, or a lot of people will assume that. What the stuff you were talking about also reminds me of, and I'm going to forget the name of this movie. It's the one that was like the first one that used the shaky cam technique, like black and white stuff, and like the kids, like What I Did Last Summer kind of thing. I can't remember what the name of
Blair Witch?
Blair Witch Project. Yeah. That's, I think, what I'm thinking of, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of moment of like, we've learned how to do really smooth videography, and now we're going to do this to make it look real, right?
Right. We're embracing this aesthetic of, exactly.
And as someone who now makes Facebook and Instagram reels and so on, I've been sort of watching the evolution of that there as well, right? There was sort of an initial push to kind of like do polished little product videos. If you're an influencer, you're crafting, you're whatever. And then there was a reaction and like, here I am in my pajamas, and you're getting like this slightly, but it's quick and I can toss it off and I'm not going to spend an hour on the editing of it. And there's like, kind of a interesting like audience tolerance question of like, how much is it going to bother you? The pajamas, I think people are okay with. They don't need to be in makeup, but like if your lighting is terrible, it's going to irritate people, right?
Well, and then there become aesthetic clusters, right? You have opera and you have punk. Like art forms tend to oscillate or diversify based on how much they prize technical
proficiency,
excellence and virtuosity versus how much they prize rawness and authenticity. That's like a dance that's been happening at least for hundreds of years across various art forms, right? So, and a lot of that has to do with technology. Like a lot of the punk aesthetic was like, because there were all these multi-track recorders and mixers and things. There was like, in the 70s, Dinosaur Rock could do this intense stuff in the studio that was considered overproduced, right? Which is a reaction against the, and so punk is like, I don't know how to play this thing, but it's loud. There was a moment, at least initially, where that was
and
the
like
vibe, right?
And like oil paintings versus graffiti, right? Like you have expensive materials that dry out that are like challenging to use in a variety of ways, and then a paint can a spray paint can then you could steal, right? And what can you make with that? And it's been I love what Spider-Man, total segue, randomness, but into
Spider-Verse aesthetic.
Spider-Verse. I love what they did with it.
That's amazing. Okay. Yeah, well, and it's kind of, that's kind of relevant. Like what we do when technology disrupts things is we art is not. We talked to this last time when we were talking about deepfakes. It's like art isn't really about accuracy, right? I mean, even just communication isn't really about like exact realism. Like, even if you're trying to convince something that somebody happened, like how you tell the story is more important than like how, exact you can get
and so that's
the reproduction of something.
This is kind of jumping ahead to it, but I'll just say, so I was on a panel talking about AI at a con recently, and one of the things that I felt at the time, and I think I still feel, is that it matters to me whether this was made by a person, right? Like that's one thing I come to art for, right? Is to connect with the artist, right? And this is, I feel like, like, and so the stuff that is kind of not quite auto-generated, but you know what I mean, like machine made in some way, I kind of feel like there's a place for it. Like I'm imagining, hospitals that wouldn't necessarily want to spend their budget on like filling the walls with artist made art, and if they can cheaply brighten up the whole hospital and have flowers blooming everywhere, I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised to see that happening. I don't know, but
I mean, sure, that'll happen, but also I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think that's the wrong way to look at it because, and it's funny because it's like, well, I think because, I think we talked last time, maybe it wasn't last time, about the moral panic when there was the photograph, right? Like all of a sudden, all this skill and virtuosity people had put into, now you could just, a dummy could sit there and press a button with their finger and it would do a better drawing than Da Vinci, right? Of the thing. And because people's model of like what art was like, well, you use your hands precisely to make it look like the thing. It was like, well, now this machine can do, so now, and they would talk about it precisely the way you're talking about hospital art. People will just point this machine at things and then they'll have paintings and like, you know what I mean? Like that's, you don't need an artist anymore. Well, it turns out after a debate of 100 years, we concluded that photographers are artists, right? We concluded that pointing the thing in the right direction, choosing the right moment, choosing the lighting, there's a whole bunch of aesthetics and judgment and taste, even though you're not doing the work that a person was. Similarly,
you can finish, but
well, and I think I really want to talk about this in terms of the eye stuff, because I think we have this relationship to it now that we always do in the early phases of a technology. We're like, there's no human, it's just magic. You just point the machine. But actually we won't end up there. I promise you in 20 years, we will not be like, a machine just made it. That won't be how we look at it.
I think you have both. So I don't know that it's a settled difference as you like.
In photography?
So for example, in photography, there is types of photography that people will acknowledge as art. And there are other types that, people may find a value in, but they wouldn't necessarily call it art. And I feel like, this is like maybe an academic discussion, right? So I'll give you a couple examples, right? Let's say I set up a bird cam outside my window and and I have chosen where to point it. I point it at my bird feeder. Okay. And then I set it up to take a picture every 10 minutes. And then I take the best of those pictures and I post them online. And there's an amazing photo in there that it caught.
Sure.
I don't know that I get so much credit for that, as a photographer, right? Like I got lucky in some sense, so
I mean, but all photography is about getting lucky.
No, okay, but
I don't know, whatever.
So and then hang on, let me give you the other example, which is this art versus craft discussion, which I get dragged into all the time because yesterday was the launch party for my new shop. I have a brick and mortar store, Serendip House, and we had the party. And much of what I do, I think art teachers I have friends who teach at the Art Institute, they probably would not call it art, right? There's discussion that happens in the art world about intentionality, about I'm not sure I agree with them. But in fact, I'm pretty sure I don't agree with them. But this is a very strongly felt and strongly reasoned to some extent, kind of argument, and about, that art has an emotional valence, and is meant to move you, is meant to perhaps to connect, etc. I feel like we should have an art teacher on to have this discussion.
I mean,
or maybe
here's
Francesca.
The thing. That feels like the second example feels like the opposite of the first example.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Duchamp's fountain, in which he pulled a urinal off a wall in a museum, is nothing but intentionality. It's intentionality and effect and emotional impact. There is no craft. 100% art, 0% craft. But that's very much like the photograph, right? That's very much like an art project in which you place a camera to take some automatic picture and you show whatever it found and you're like, right? That's conceptual. The less carefully you point the camera and think about lighting and angles and whatever, actually the more high art it is in some way, the more conceptual art it is, right? Like if you're actually setting up a studio and you've got like the right lighting, you have a person sit and you arrange there, that's more commercial photography. If you if you have a whatever. Anyway, but the point, let's back up from that, because I don't have a dog in this fight. And what I want to say, I'm not predicting, by no means am I predicting that in 20, 50 years, everybody will think that that people who use AI to generate art are 100% artists. Oh, no. Anymore.
Okay.
But there will precisely all the debates you're talking about, where some people still don't accept photography as an art, or only certain kinds, or it's about the craft, or it's about the intentionality. Same way people talk about music. People love to use the term art to point at some things that people do for reasons that strike me as, just like the way they want to use culture, right, or religion, to only talk about some of the things that people do that to me look like the same human activity, but they, you know what I mean, like people, anyway. But so people will definitely contest all of these things. What I'm saying, though, is that nobody will just purely naively say, or maybe somebody will, but it'll be an aesthetic, subjective, specific position to be like, there's no human. It's all just technology. Like we that's always our reaction to new technology, right? And one thing, a thing that's really interesting to see is, okay, so this happened to draftsperson people in the 1850s. It happened to musicians in some sense, like, I mean, instrumentalists whose craft is producing sounds with an instrument. It happened to them in the 70s and 80s, right? Like and the whole thing about drum machines and about like the synthesizers and the whole moral panic around that. Like, we're now at a point where you can, I mean, you have to be an expert to be able to tell a GarageBand instrument from an actual instrument. And there was a moral panic, like, well, we just won't use instrumentalists anymore. But of course we do, like, for a couple of reasons. One is it doesn't sound quite the same. You can't tell I'm sure if somebody just played me some violin from GarageBand or some actual violinist, I wouldn't be able to tell consciously. But in fact, when someone's putting together a I listen to Song Exploder a lot, right? So you're talking about these people figuring out exactly which track, and sometimes they're like, we totally want the crappiest tinny synthesizer sound, and sometimes we've got this amazing violinist and brought them in, and sometimes they're like, we took the amazing violinist and we layered the crappy violin sound onto it because that's the effect we wanted, like, right? Like, so it doesn't. And nobody thinks you just point GarageBand. Nobody thinks anymore that means you're not making art with GarageBand. And actually, what's really interesting is when I was young and we were young, instrumentalists were big in popular culture, and not just classical music, but like Eddie Van Halen, right? People who their skill set was playing a guitar or whatever. And what's really interesting about the landscape of pop music, and I'm not saying there's nobody anymore, but there's almost like classical musicians who are like novelty acts, like Lindsey Sterling, who plays a violin while dancing. And then there's, I mean, no shade to Lindsey Sterling. I don't mean by novelty act, I don't mean to throw it on the bus. I'm just saying it's not. But when my kids think about music, they think about singers, because the human voice is the most like intimate. So you definitely, you don't necessarily care if the person playing the violin is actually playing the violin, but if somebody's singing to you, you're thinking of them and that person in a way that, unless you're not necessarily thinking of Yo-Yo Ma as a person, unless you're really a deep Yo-Yo Ma fan when you're listening to classical violin. But most people, if Olivia Rodrigo is singing to them, are thinking about Olivia Rodrigo singing to them, right? So you think about, the interesting people is the people are singers and producers. Producers are huge. Producers in our childhood were like this anonymous person behind the scenes who knew what the line was between producers and mixers and engineers and whatever. Now it's like Billy and Phineas, right? Like, those are the two, right? There's somebody singing who's the emotional human intimacy, and then there's someone else who creates all the sounds for them. And they might bring in some session musicians to do things, but like the person in center stage is like the person who's orchestrating that on a computer. So that's, I don't know. That's like, it's interesting to see what's come before, where it's like, that's all automated. It's all computerized, right? It's all the technology. But of course, it's a million human judgment decisions. So that's history. I'll let you get back to but I just mean, I think of course it's shocking that you can say, draw me an elephant, and bang, there's an elephant there. That seems like you did not do very much work, even less than going to a place where there was an elephant pointing a box at it and pressing a button. Of course, that's shocking. But in fact, I was thinking about last episode. I'll say one more thing. I was to segue this into AI. I was thinking about last episode when we were talking about the Gaudi house. The Gaudi house where
there's some, and I saw Gaudi house.
There was an AI made something that looked like a Gaudi house, and somebody on Facebook was like, here's all the things that are wrong. The window's in the wrong place. It's not symmetrical, blah, 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 blah. Well, after we talked about that, I was listening to the episode again, and I was like, well, you know what people actually do is they say, draw me a Gaudi house. This is how you actually should use this AI. This is the best way. Then you see tips and tricks on using AIs. Draw me a Gaudi house. And then you say, while the session is still running, so it has the memory of what it did before, you're talking about the same AI. You say, okay, but the windows aren't in the right place. They need to be higher. And then you say, okay, but it's a little garish. Can you tone the colors down? And then you say, okay, but it needs to be symmetrical. You know what I mean? You can converse with an LLM or whatever and like refine. And that partnership between a human and a machine is actually what creates the end. You shoot a million pictures and you only pick one, right? That's the one you publish in a magazine. You're going to have this long conversation with an AI if you're using the AI, and in the end, you're going to come up with something which is a product of your collaboration with it, which is like Phineas mixing a song with a lot of imaginary instrumentalists in some sense.
So I was quiet for most of that because I'm sure you're right, but I don't know anything about music, so I don't know who Phineas is. And
I meant like Billie Eilish and her
I don't know
brother.
who I have heard of Billie Eilish, anyway. So I'm just saying, like, that's what I'm this is an area I don't know much about. So but I'm assuming many of our listeners do. So I think they would get a lot out of that. So I let you run, but I don't have much of a response to it. I think your general point I agree with. Maybe what I'd like to do, you brought up work, and I think that's key to this kind of question, right? Because, and I'll talk about an area I know, specifically knitting and crocheting, because I think there's some really interesting, relevant pieces to that. So you're wearing, I'm looking at Ben on YouTube, so you're on Zoom. He's wearing a cap. I can't quite tell from here, but it looks like it was probably knit. Yeah, yes. I mean, that looks like knit and purl.
My wife's cap.
Your wife's,
I think my wife made it.
It looks like it's probably handmade. It's not like perfectly even, and in a very lovely way. I am wearing a knit sweater that is absolutely machine made, that I bought in a store. But I know how to knit. I know how to crochet. I could make this sweater. So a couple interesting things. One, as of right now, we don't have machines that can crochet, which I think is fascinating. I mean, I assume that's going to happen at some point, but we don't have
maybe not.
I don't know, but right now we don't, and it means that that when you buy things that are crocheted, they are cheap. It either means the artist is wildly underselling themselves, because the amount of labor and time it would take, blah blah blah, right? Or it's a product of globalization, and you're getting it from a developing nation that was probably colonized, that as a result has a exchange rate that makes it feasible, and they're probably working in a sweatshop, right? So when you go to Target and you buy a cute crocheted thing for $10, that's what's happening. So I'm in the crafting world, right? And I make various things for sale, and some things that I make are cost effective, and some are very challenging. Knitting and crocheting are very difficult to do in a way that you could make a profit off of it. And so one of the things I've been thinking about getting is a knitting machine. So a knitting machine is, something where you do have an initial labor step of like taking the yarn, and it's like a machine, like a round thing with a bunch of like hooks on it, basically, kind of. And you put the yarn, you have an initial kind of threading stage, basically. And then you set it going, and then you get a hat, right? And so the debate is, when you go to crafting stores, venues, so on, can you put handmade on that or not, right? And some people are kind of upset about you putting handmade on it. Because the machine did the work, and other people are like, well, knitting needles are a tool and this machine is a tool. There's no like functional difference between the two, except one is faster than the other, right? And you get
and that the word handmade does sound like that's true of all things that are handmade versus machine made. All the machine made things are made by tools, which are just faster than doing them by hand. right?
Well,
I think that's the difference
yes.
maybe between homemade and factory made. It's not factory made, it's homemade.
But it's still, the knitting machine I'm using in my basement is still homemade, right? It's not in a factory.
No, that's what I mean. It's home, but not your knitting machine would be homemade, but not handmade.
But I still think it's handmade personally. I think
okay.
the part where I am putting the threads on the machine is the piece
does use your hands.
It uses my hands. It is you know, it's a better tool. It's not a better tool, it's a different tool, right?
I mean, also if you typed into a Midjourney knitting program, make me a cap, that would also use your hands to type the words.
Well, so this is my, it's interesting, right? Like that's kind of where I'm going, right? But anyway, this is a big debate, and I think it's an interesting debate because a lot of the artist ethical conversation, and I understand why they center on this, is their frustration that the audience doesn't understand how much work artists put in, right? And so they see the AI and they're like, that AI program is creating it super fast and it's going to devalue the work that we put in when we do the same thing. So when something that would take us 30 hours, the AI does in 30 seconds. This is a huge part of the conversation. So you're frowning at me, but like this I see this all the time. And so they then want to focus on the work piece of it. And I kind of feel like, I mean, this is right from a labor perspective, but from an artistic perspective, I don't think we really should be valuing art based on how much work it is for the artist, right? Because there is, as you say, if I take a photograph, it may be a moment of clicking, right? Like it may be, as opposed to an oil painting that took me 300 hours to paint, right? And I just think that's the wrong debate. That is not that's not the grounds for not using AI. If you're going to make an argument,
I mean, yeah, well, I mean, there's a bunch of different grounds, but anyway, about that point, I mean, I mean,
I guess there's a kind of question of like, are you willing to pay more for something if you know that it took X many hours to make? And I think that's an interesting question, and you may decide that as a person, but I don't know that it necessarily means that the art is better art.
I think there's two different, yes, well, there's two different things here. One is aesthetic and the other is political, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't think there's a general answer aesthetically to does labor matter in art. Like Duchamp's urinal is great because the point he's making is that he took no labor. That's like, it would be, if he had made that urinal by hand, it would ruin the artwork, right?
Right.
However, it would be hilarious if somebody lovingly crafted a urinal by hand and reproduced. That would also be a great piece of art. And there are these artworks now, there's like installation performance pieces where the labor is 100% the point. In fact, where there's a kind of a celebration of masochism where somebody has like, I don't know, made a giant column out of their toenails over 20 years. And it's like, the labor is precisely what you're appreciating. So I don't think there's a general answer. It's like when you go to see an oil painting, you might be like, wow, that took a lot of work. And you'd be disappointed to find out that it had been sprayed by a machine, and that would devalue it for you. It totally depends on and I think more than labor in the artistic conversation, as opposed to the political conversation, more than labor per se, it's really about what you said before. We rarely, not rarely, it is a common way that we consume art that we are receiving it as a communication from a person, to some extent, an imagined person who might correspond to a real person, but we have a parasocial relationship with them. We don't really know Taylor Swift, right? We have, but our imagination that this person is talking to us and that we see into their soul and we know what's going on with them is important for a lot of kind of art, which, by the way, it seems like is almost more important now. It feels like there's more confessional pop music in which naturally because we live in a panopticon now, right? Like everybody, like all the artists who figured out how to flourish in this environment are ones who are using the fact that they're constantly being commented on in social media. It's not the occasional paparazzi showing to a gala opening. It's there every moment is somehow, like, the fact that they're leveraging that to like let you into their life is one way. Is that, a lot of the predictions about I mean, the music industry was widely expected, the recording music industry was widely expected to die. You know what I mean? Like sort of like, and in many ways has become much like there have been economic shifts, which are terrible for working musicians. But it's interesting that you have these massive superstars who are very often working in this confessional mode, right?
Right.
That's part of the story. It's very integrated.
Right.
We would not accept the one reason we would not accept a version of driver's license which was, again, you don't know music, so you don't know
I don't know what you're
about.
talking about.
Okay.
Okay.
So some like a big hit song from the last couple of years, we would not accept a version that was made, that was quote unquote made by a machine, which is to say marketed to us as if to emphasize the technological aspect as opposed to the human aspect. Because when we hear that song, we're not just listening to the song as we're both listening to it as an abstract work. We're also like, oh, we're also, it's like connected to all the gossip, right? It's like, oh, that's the song about the person that they broke up with.
No, and so I'm familiar with that phenomenon. Like my daughter is a big Taylor Swift fan. My one of my coworkers at the shop is a big Taylor Swift fan, and both of
Taylor
them,
Swift is a past master of harnessing that, right?
And both of them will not just make me listen to the music, but will tell me all the gossip while I am, especially at the store where I'm there for 5 hours,
and I'm like,
I now know a bunch.
I now know all the people Taylor broke up with.
Well, and I don't actually, it has all gone out of my head again. I don't retain any of it, but I have listened to it, and I knew it briefly. So, and I feel like I should clarify
part of the work.
Yeah, it is. And let me clarify here 2 things. One is that I want to make clear to our listeners that I do listen to music, and if we want to have a discussion about musicals or about
we can go
music,
to musicals.
No, we don't need to. But I'm just saying, if we, or
about, I mean, Rent is Jonathan Larson dying is a huge part of the story of Rent, right?
Sure, yes. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know that can be extended to like musicals in general, but anyway, leaving that aside, or if we want to talk about like sea shanties, and so I do have some knowledge of music. I'm not completely ignorant, but I'm pretty ignorant, right? Like pop music, like I listened to pop music in the mid '80s, and when I was in high school, and so I can sing those songs for you, but that's about it. So if you need music from
anyway, all I wanted to say is that
okay, no, it's good, it's good. But I see what you're saying.
I would say one more thing about the parasocial thing, which is Byron, right? Like this isn't new. It was a big part of right. Well,
and that's what
celebrity interacting with the art is like.
That's what I was going to connect to, right? So like there is definitely an argument that my biggest writing project and my most significant writing project is my blog, right? Which I've been doing since 1995. And it is absolutely, a way that in which readers connect with me, right? I mean, and it is, and it's, I think what's sort of interesting is like, that works for me. I like blogging. I like doing, I wouldn't call it confessional exactly, but, like honest discussion of my life is very, I find it interesting. That is not most writers' project, right?
Well, it's not really my project. You've done a much better job at the Taylor Swift thing than I have.
Well, but that's, I mean, that's sort of what I mean. Like I almost feel like that's an edge case. Like those of us who do that, sure, it's working for us. I don't know how useful
I don't know that it's an edge case. I think that it's a mode, and there's a bunch of different modes that move through art, and it's perennially, and there are times when it's more,
I mean edge case in a sense. I see a lot of writers complaining about needing to do social media and hating it. They don't want, they want to just tell their stories, their fictional stories, and they don't want to make their lives and their personalities and personas part of marketing their work. And
I mean, yes, you're hearing them complaining now, and you're not listening to the vaudeville artists who are complaining when the movies come in because some anonymous person in a studio across the country is now filling the screen instead of their individual personal relationship with all the fans that they used to have, right? Like at different historical moments, different types lose out, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's different, right? Like, I mean, if I do a reading, I have like a very direct connection with the readers who are there at the event. We can talk, we can engage back and forth. I think there's a difference between that and the more broadcasty kind of social media work, in which I often hear nothing from I have like 10,000 followers on Facebook, right? Most of them I've never heard anything from, right? So, so anyway, I wanted to connect this back, and I think, and then like I'm dragging us to ethics, but the hospital art example, I had a specific example, which is, so when I was going through cancer treatment, I had a lot of MRIs, and at some point they got some Monet, I think, watercolor, plastic film to go over the light, the overhead fluorescent light, right, that you stare at when you are lying down and going through the MRI. Maybe it wasn't the MRI, maybe it's a radiation treatment. It was something where I had to like lie there for 15 minutes and stare at the ceiling. And it was great. It was just better, even though it was literally like this plastic film reproduction of Monet. It was no like art that was personally conveyed, no connection to an artist, etc. So when I didn't care about Monet, it was just nice to have something pretty to look at. And this is, again, like the craft art discussion often gets divided along the pretty line, which, and I want to point out the gendered aspect of this, right? Because women's art has, like knitting, crochet, etc., has often been devalued as like, oh, that's not serious art, it's just pretty. And a lot of what I make is about pretty. It is about being able to walk in, see this like pretty candle, and take it home and for an affordable price and put it in your house and feel like my space is a little nicer now. And there's no, and the candle is made from a mold that some other artist designed. I didn't even, I could design the molds. I could learn how to do that and do that. But right now it's made by somebody else. And then all I'm doing is pouring the hot wax in, maybe choosing a scent and a color, maybe not, and demolding it. So it's very mechanical. Like a factory person could absolutely do this, right? Or a factory could just do this. And yet people come to my shop and buy the ones I make and take them home and feel a connection.
And maybe that is partly because they're reading your blog.
Maybe because they're reading my blog, right?
So it is a Taylor Swift thing.
So it is a little bit of the Taylor Swift thing. But also even if they, if they come to Sprout, which is like 33 little incubator businesses, people will say to me, like, it's just really nice knowing you're supporting an individual. They may not meet any of those people, right? But they know that this is mostly women and minority owned, and they can go in and they're like, they know that this is a mom who's trying to do a side hustle. And
there's another aspect. There's another aspect to the Taylor Swiftiness of it, which is that if they know you a little, they have it's a way of parsing the aesthetic. It's a way of being like, I go to a candle store and then it's overwhelming. There's a million of them and they're all from a factory and I don't know. And even if I don't particularly have any altruistic reason to support an artist, even if you were a billionaire and they were like, whatever, Marianne doesn't need the money, they still could go in and go like, oh, Marianne picked this one. So it may be from a mold or whatever, but it's her aesthetic. I trust her aesthetic.
It is. And it's definitely, and that's definitely there. So like, but I do think that there's a way in which everything related to home decorating, things related to clothing, often things related to food, there's often a political
feminized art gets stuck in the craft box. And I'm not sure what connect this back to AI. I mean, why this episode?
Well, I think it's this question of like what counts as art, I guess, is really my connection of what counts as art. And if we're not going to, we've, I think, dismissed the idea that it's the amount of labor that goes into it. So
I don't think we've dismissed that politically. I think we've said aesthetically that's like one of the many things.
So I'm having the aesthetic argument here. So so it's not about the labor. It is maybe about the intentionality, right? Just
I think like the aesthetic argument resists any generalization because whatever, as soon as we came up with like let me just present this as a mathematical proof. Let's say we came up with a general summary of what matters with aesthetics. It would then immediately become a really interesting aesthetic project to create art that did not correspond to that every artist would immediately go, okay, I can do that's actually one of the beautiful things about the protean nature of art. As soon as you made any generalization, I would immediately start thinking. And tell me any rule about how stories should be. I will try to write a story that breaks it. Right.
Well, that's what Jed did, that long list at Strange Horizons of the stories we've seen too often, and many people will take that as a challenge, right?
Take that as a challenge. Exactly.
And most of them will fail. I mean, because they really have seen them too
often. I have many stories,
but every once in a while something breaks through and is like.
I mean, really I do that all the time. I mean, I think Embracing the New, which was my first story that got it got nominated for the Nebula, was basically purely in what?
Sure, I know
in defiance of a writing rule.
I will say, as an editor, you see a lot of bad attempts, right? Like that are like.
Well, sure. Because they're a good. Well, that gets us. Let's bracket that. That's because writing rules are rules of thumb, which statistically work well, and breaking them is hard, and that makes it interesting. And art never arrives at a final border, right? The edges are where it's hard. The middle is where it's easy, but you never reach the wall, right? Anyway.
So now back to AI and the ethics.
Sure.
So we haven't really talked about the stolen art piece of it, and I do want to.
Well, that's I think that's the thing, is that the ethics are I don't think the ethics are separable from. We haven't talked about the stolen art piece of it. We haven't talked about the cooking the planet piece of it. Like, the ethics are not really separable from like how it actually works and will work economically and so on, right? And the whether it's all a Ponzi scheme. I mean, I was looking a little skeptical earlier. Partly, I'm a little skeptical of the assumption, and I wanted to link to that to link in the show notes to that Cory Doctorow essay. I'm skeptical of the assumptions like it'll just get better. Well, will it just get better? Did Uber just get better? Like, realize that this is a bubble. This is a massive amount of VC money flooding in to make something artificially cheap, which is computationally and energy-wise quite expensive, so that it seems temporarily, until the VCs can cash out, like this is a free thing that everyone can play around with.
Sure.
But in fact, it's not. You know what I mean? It's like it's just the classical thing where, like, it's like Amazon Drive the bookstores had a business. Like, right? That's one piece of it. Another piece of it is the stolen art, and there's a couple of ways of looking at that. But what I find, I think there's an interesting aesthetic argument among sort of copy leftists and copyrightists, if you will, right? Among like, how much should we insist that a writer have to license any use of their work versus how much should we say there's such a thing as a commons. But note that what we're dealing with in this case is neither of those things, because nobody, what's clearly wrong to me, it might be right to say you cannot have any of these tools unless you pay each artist, which in principle means you can't have any of these tools, because there isn't any. Well, one option is to say we stay inside of liberal capitalism. You must purchase the right for each thing to use it as training data, because, as we discussed last time, these things only work with like mammoth training data, which you can't possibly vet and source. That just means you can't have.
Let me pause for a second before you go on, because I feel like this is a tech thing that I maybe don't understand. So, when all of this started breaking and the artists were saying this is all trained on
it's all
stolen art, and my question was, well, can't somebody build one of these that is sourced only on things that have given permission to be sourced, right? And I think what you're saying is that that's maybe theoretically feasible, but you would need so much of it to make it work that's not.
I don't know as much about the visual art piece of it. It's possible that the way that the diffusion models or whatever they are that use visual art, I think we've lumped them together because they've arrived at the same time as large language models, and they both are, I believe, recursive neural networks, maybe antagonistic recursive neural networks. Like, they might be similar, but I don't know enough to say it's impossible to do. I know a little bit more, although I'm still talking out of my butt to some extent, about the way that large language models work. Certainly, the thing I was talking about last time was that some aspects, the ones we're interested in, are really exponential with number of data, which means, you know what I mean? Like, it's like you add a little more data, you get a lot, like, on the end, you know what I mean? Like, you need, so it's the kind of thing where, and Corey talks about in this essay that like when these things collapse, and if in fact these things collapse and die because it was all a bubble, like maybe what we'll have is small honed large medium-sized language models,
Right.
that aren't
That are
really
like,
this at all, right?
right, but that like drawn like, I mean, I'm just thinking we have Project Gutenberg, we have, we have this vast amount of human art that was created that is now out of copyright, right? And both visual and
Yeah, I mean,
text.
I don't,
And
and I don't
so
want to, yes, and certainly, and I don't want to say that it's impossible that somebody will do that. I just think it's,
like
I just think,
all of NASA's photography is, I think, for public use, for example, right? So
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there's not some
yeah.
data corpus that could get you something interesting, but definitely, I don't think it's a, I don't think it was, let's put it this way. I don't want to say it's impossible that there is some way you could have a large enough public domain source that you could use, maybe, and I also that you could train on, but I also think it would be saying that they did it this way just because just out of pure, I mean, I think there was plenty of like callous VC bullshit. I think that's why they did it. But to suggest that that is, that was a fuck up on their part because they could just have easily have used public domain stuff and got the same effect, I don't think is true, right? I think that the way we got this far this quick was that they just slurped up the internet, and the internet is really much bigger than the parts that are labeled clearly with proper metadata as public domain. Like those are it's a tiny subset.
Right. Agreed.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a question. What I was going to say is, so there's a potential position, liberal copyrightist position, which is, like sort of like liberal capitalism. Individuals own the rights to art. That is theirs. You cannot do anything with it, including train an AI on it. And that's a very reasonable position, particularly because if you do the right prompts, you can literally get back somebody's copyrighted work out of these things, right? So I'm not dismissing that position, but that would basically mean you need to assemble. Now, there might be some slightly, so that would be a whole other project. And maybe that's where it'll go. And I would be delighted if that's where it went. If the courts ruled that you need to have all the metadata, then that means we will, maybe we wait 20 years before we get this because everything has to be like labeled properly. And, I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't take that long. Maybe I'm overestimating. But maybe the courts say you can't use people's art, which I would celebrate. I think that would be great. I don't think I don't know if that's where the wind is blowing, but that would be cool.
Yeah.
Another possibility is that you have some kind of more, I mean, this is a thing that wouldn't work in America, but it would be reasonable. In Germany, you prove to the government that you're an artist and then you get a stipend. You just have to show the government that like a certain percentage of your work, that you're like a percentage of your income is like, you don't make more on other things than you do on art. Like you file your taxes.
Yeah.
You file your tax. I'm not in Switzerland, but in Germany, I have German friends. I think Ruth Nestwald was telling me about this. When you file your taxes, you mark what income is produced by art and what by other things. And if it's the majority of his art, you can register as an artist, and then Germany gives you money because they want artists. Right?
Okay, that is awesome. I didn't know about that. I knew about Ireland, that if you can get registered as an artist in Ireland, you don't pay taxes on your art.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe I don't know if they give you money or if it's a tax benefit, but in principle, it's quite economically important. It's not just a cute little thing. It's it's like for German artists, that's a big deal. So, it would be certainly possible if we were talking about like, if the world worked like Germany, or I suppose Germany independently, to just say, well, you can make an LLM, you can train it all this stuff, and then it's kind of like the way that it's kind of like almost the way that covering music works. Almost everybody who publishes music just enters it into a registry, and like the rights are orchestrated through it. And so if you want to cover a song, you don't have to like negotiate one-on-one. Like if you're a tiny little band and you want to cover a Taylor Swift song, you don't have to like get in touch with Taylor's people. That would be hugely prohibited. You just do the standard thing that everybody's agreed to, where you kick back the correct amount and whatever, right? So essentially you could say, like, if you use this stuff, there's a fee, and it just goes to artists in general. We divide it among the artists. They're all in the registry, right? So that would be kind of a more socialistic approach, sort of, quasi. And another thing would be to say, okay, well, this is the sum total of human knowledge. You slurped it in, you built a thing. Like if you want to go, like, if you're really excited about the notion that this thing woke up, you know what I mean? Like the sort of like, I know it didn't wake up like in the way that we project, but like it's like, wow, it actually, like, this magical thing happened where it learned to truly model the world. Like we were saying, it knows you can't stack a book on eggs, it builds checkerboards in its mind. Like it's there's some there, and if the only way we get there is to slurp the whole world, then maybe you say, great, that there is now public domain, it owns itself. You know what I mean? The company the company wrote like a 2-page, you know what I mean? Like the company wrote a 2-page. The thing that I find, all these positions, I think that's the most sort of copy leftist position to say, guess what? It's all public domain. I mean, that's a little rude for the person who, with proper prompt engineering, you could produce their actual copyright. That breaks copyright. Essentially, that destroys copyright. And then we need a whole new world, and we need some way for artists to eat. Maybe like the socialist thing. I don't know, whatever. But I'm not saying I would go there. I think that would have possibly devastating consequences. And the first thing is certainly the most conservative, safe, like that would be fine. But the last thing I want to mention is the thing that actually is probably where neoliberal capitalism will just head on rails. It's probably what a Supreme Court with nobody in the streets would just decide, which is kind of the default thing, which is like whoever owns the hardware owns the art that was, or owns the model that was produced on the hardware. And that strikes me as monumentally stupid. Like the idea that you could just have a machine, and because you own the physical box, like the silicon chips that it's running on, and paid for all the electricity that it sucked in, you trained it on the world, and now that totally, I think, misrepresents what's the important part, right? The important part is the data. We just said that last time. The program's very short. What we've learned is that you need a relatively simple program and a massive amount of data. And that, I mean, I'm not saying that it's not brilliant that you figured out the statistics to write that short program. It's a breakthrough. But I mean, that doesn't mean you necessarily own anything you pointed at. Like they've made a really interesting machine that can learn about the world, but that doesn't mean they own the world just because they can point the machine at the world. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, I don't know. I think it's full of like moral and ethical quandaries, and we're not really talking yet about the political impact, which is a different thing.
Yeah.
But just in terms of like conceptually who should own a painting that is produced by Midjourney, I'm going to say probably not Midjourney.
That's
interesting. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. No, I get it. So
like either all of us or, you know.
Well, and I think that's, I mean, to some extent, right, that's where Hollywood ended up after the writer's strike, right? And
that's a great segue to the politics, because that was such a brilliant moment to a brilliant moment for them to strike, a moment when they still had the leverage to do so. You know, that was some brilliant labor organizing, because had they waited 25 years, it probably would have been too late, right? And
or
if
even 5 years, honestly,
maybe even 5 years, maybe even 5 years, like, but you know, and what they achieved did really put you know, we sometimes have this sort of fatalism.
It put some brakes on it, right?
Huge brakes on it. And if you write, if you go tell a large language model to write a novel for you and publish it, well, that's fine, but Hollywood's never optioning it. You know what I mean? I think so that is which it doesn't just affect movie jobs, it affects, you know what I mean? Like I feel like Marvel Comics will not fool around with doing because they're not going to, just for some comic book, they're not going to use AI if that means they can't make a movie. You know what I mean? And that's a huge strike that was a huge victory for labor. And it's actually useful to think about these categories of labor and capital. Like the thing about the theory that says that because Midjourney owned the box on which they ran the algorithm that they pointed at all the world's information, and it grew a brain, like the fact that because they own the box, they own the product, that is the definition of capital, right? That means we just made this mind, and that argument is it's capital. It's just a thing I own. And the smarter, I mean, we're just at the infancy of this, right? We're just like it's just doing a 1% of you know, better than a teddy bear at caring about you. But like as this grows, if we establish a precedent that like whoever owns it, right? Like they're the sort of fictional dream of they're going to wake up as AIs is politically useful, right? I mean, I as I said, I think it's hugely overstated, but to say, hey, but if someday we make people, should they be slaves? Like, do you own them because you own the box they're running on? Is actually, I think, kind of an important question, right?
Let me ask you this. So I feel like I'm in a little bit of an odd position here, because you know, I'm a teacher, So I teach my students not to plagiarize. And I try pretty hard not to plagiarize. I ran into some trouble with some artwork on that front, as you know, sometime back, because I, like I thought what I was doing in copying some outlines and then making changes was sufficient to count as transformative. And after discussion with artists, I was like, oh yeah, it's really not. So so I took down I had a little bit of stuff up for sale. I think I had made a couple dollars, but and so I was wrong. I was just wrong about that.
Well, yeah, but useful to note, you were wrong according to the local standards of, you know what I mean? Like you weren't sufficiently, because it is very variegated landscape.
But even according to my standards, right? I would say like I would, if I had realized that it was not sufficiently transformative for the artists I knew, right? I guess that is local standards, right?
Yeah, I would be educated about the.
Right. And this is a conversation I have with my students about plagiarism, right? They often don't understand what in academia counts as plagiarism or doesn't. So
I published pro fiction, which is clearly like Batman fanfic, right? The Death Trap of Dr. Nefario.
Well, and in fact, like there's obviously a lot of stuff that is fanfic with the serial numbers, rubbed off, right? Then gets published, right? And sometimes wildly successfully, right? So
which I think is fine, but again, it's fine. But I think it's fine, but again, it's confusing. It's like hard to navigate. It's like where is the line? It's a very fuzzy line.
So then where I've ended up with LLMs and Midjourney AI stuff is I have not used any of it so far. Like I have not even tested it out in the privacy of my own home under the covers with the lights off. Like, I was like, and it's starting to feel a little bit silly. Like when Facebook and everything else is like, keeps asking me if I want AI prompts to like help me write my posts. And I have to keep saying, no, I'll write them myself. Damn you.
God damn you. Kids, get off my lawn. You robot kids.
And I can't
you robot kids, get off my lawn.
Right. And I can't turn it off. I use Canva. Canva keeps everything is suggesting it right now.
Oh my God.
And it's making me crazy and I don't want any of it. But
well, to some extent, the desperation with which they're pushing this stuff at you may actually be a sign in favor of Corey's argument.
Maybe
like
so, but I do know. So so here's a couple things to just throw into the mix for writers to think about. Cover art. I know cover art can be expensive. Good cover art can be expensive. Cover design is expensive. You can pay someone to do it cheaply. Often you can tell it was done cheaply. And so I am seeing indie book writers who are very happy to use Midjourney designed covers and artists who are very upset about that. And there's kind of I think right now the pro magazines are holding a pretty firm line about not doing AI. And like at the SLF, we had a contest we do an Illustrator of the Year contest and with a prize, and we said and we kind of had this discussion, like I don't know where this is going to go long term, but right now we're saying we're not accepting AI generated designs for that, right? Not that we can necessarily tell from looking, but at least the artist is attesting that this was not AI generated when they submit it to us, right? So that's one space, but I can see the economic crunch for writers who are on a shoestring in indie publishing, who are like indie publishing, who are like feeling like I can't afford a real artist, right? And so I just wanted to like put that out there as like a potentially
and also if they go on some Fiverr or whatever, some service, and to say, hey, I need an artist to do this for me, and the artist said, oh, I totally didn't use AI on this, how do they know? Like unless it's an artist
that's a whole other thing. And then similarly, audiobook narrators are, I think now it's becoming an issue. And I'm not an audiobook person, and I don't know, I listen to podcasts, but not audiobooks. And I don't know whether the audiobook narrators are any good. I'm guessing they're not as good as people yet.
The AIs,
the AI ones. Sorry, the AI ones. But
sure,
possibly they will be in time. Maybe not necessarily, but maybe. And so that's another area where people are having to make decisions. And I feel like those areas, it's fairly easy for me to draw a bright line and be like, yeah, I'm not good with using an audiobook AI or a cover art AI. But, you know, I have friends who now like use ChatGPT constantly in their daily lives for shopping lists, for cover letters, for recommendation letters, for, you know, like it has become very quickly part of the business workplace. And also people do use it to draft their Facebook posts and so on. And this kind of gets into, at some point I'd like to touch on teaching in this maybe after the break, but it gets into the like the utility of it as a means of combating writing anxiety and artistic anxiety as like a initial step is, I think, very interesting to me. So I just threw a whole bunch of stuff in there. But
I mean, I definitely know people who are using it in business, and mostly because I think it's better at that. I don't think it's a big threat to fiction writers, but at the moment, but but certainly if what you are producing, like, you know, we have this well, there's this hilarious I don't know if we've talked about David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs before on the podcast, but that's a great book that talks about, it was really fascinating, talks about how, to briefly summarize that because I think it's relevant, you know, we were promised in the Victorian era that as automation came, we would all only work 4 hours a day and we would enjoy the glorious surplus of all the machines doing everything for us. And or the dystopian idea that there would be masses of unemployed people who were like rioting the streets because the robots would be doing all the work. Like either we were all going to share the benefits of that or they would be hoarded by capitalists. But in any event, there was definitely not going to be any work to do anymore, right? Whether that was going to be good or bad. That was a general consensus. And it kept happening. Like it was then predicted in the 30s and in the 70s with every wave of automation, with every new kinds of thing. It was like there's going to be massive unemployment. Everyone's going to be out of work. And both communists, orthodox communists, and like capitalist economists agreed that like a company would rationally or ruthlessly, depending on who you talk to, but in any event, it would definitely lay off people whose work wasn't needed. They would try to hire as few people as possible to make as much profit as possible. And so if there were, every time you would have an increase in productivity, you'd have less jobs. That never happened at all. And what Graeber, who's an anthropologist who likes to think about economics and make fun of, he died, was an anthropologist who likes to investigate economics and make fun of economists, pointed out is that the people who hire people are not actually motivated to like purely like serve the interests of maximizing profit for the company. They often just have to pay lip service to that. But very often they have a whole other bunch of reasons for hiring people, including their own status. Because if they manage a lot of people, they're higher status, and various other effects that he goes into. But in any event, what it produces is a whole lot of people. And he did like surveys where he like asked people like, how important do you think your job is for anything? And massive numbers of people today, and it's a huge unexplored social issue, are like, my job is meaningless. Like no one has to do this. People are spending a lot of times producing PDFs for the annual board members report that they know no one will read. And I've been on lots of projects where there were, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars being thrown around for things we knew that no one would ever use. We knew.
Okay.
We knew no one would ever use it.
I would say that would make me crazy.
Oh, it was terrible. It's soul destroying. It's soul destroying. And that's a big part of the book. He goes into the psychology of like how important it is for us, for our work to be like efficacious, and how incredibly soul deadening it is, and what an enormous psychological crisis it is. He distinguishes between shit jobs, which are things people need to do and they get treated badly. Those are things like, you know, caring for sick people and harvesting vegetables that actually we need someone to do, and those people get treated like shit. And bullshit jobs, which are often high status and like have lots of benefits and everything, and very often have no utility whatsoever. There are jobs that are, you know, and then there's the other quadrants. There are jobs where it's meaningless and you get treated badly, and there are jobs where you get treated well and it's meaningful. But those are like the really plum jobs, right? Anyway, so people, and in fact, people are expected to some extent to, you know, accept lower wages because something's meaningful. Like teachers are like there's an argument of like, well, but you're a teacher, like we don't have to pay you a lot. You're getting the satisfaction of like making a difference with children, which is a very perverse argument, right? It's like, because those, car dealers and stockbrokers, well, it makes sense that they get paid money because they hate their job. Like it's a weird, but anyway, what we arrived at is that I think we figured out, if you believe that book, we're at a point where it's like, oh, there's huge pressure to always come up with work.
Yeah.
And one thing that's funny is whenever we increase productivity, it just gets absorbed. Like it doesn't ever get back to us doing less work. So by this process, like now you have a bunch of people who are scurrying around, choosing the fonts and picking out to lay out documents for the annual report that will not be read, right? Not even the annual report, like the preliminary report to the subcommittee of the whatever. They are spending all this time. Then they're like, oh, we have ChatGPT, it'll just do it for us and we'll get to take time off. So it's just hilarious because of course now the system will produce a whole bunch of other things that need to be done where you have to like hand tweak the, you know what I mean? at all.
So
anyway.
I have a bunch of responses to that.
Yeah.
One is that for anyone listening who thinks nobody reads the reports, I think part of the reason why school board has been so hard for me and has taken up so much time is I actually read all the damn reports, which I think probably I'm not supposed to do, but they give it to me and tell me I'm supposed to read it. So I read it.
Sure.
But anyway.
Well, school board might not be, I mean, that's
not
subject to quite the same thing as like the middle of a giant Swiss bank. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just saying someone might be reading your reports, but that you don't expect.
Oh, somebody might be paid to read your reports. That's their job. And nothing will ever happen. They're just required to have read them. And so they go dutifully to the office every day and read the reports that the other people are producing.
All right. But maybe
there's a lot of meaningless economic activity.
I believe you. Anyway, I have not encountered that. That's not an area like almost everything I do is, to me, seems like it is pretty directly tied to meaningful stuff. But anyway, putting that aside, I just
want to say one challenge. I think everything you do may be meaningful, but in terms of not encountering it, American academia has exploded in how much it costs to go to school over the last, and teacher salaries did not really increase. What happened was a lot of layers of administration and a lot of facilities, right? Is that not true? All right, different.
It's a different topic, and you're wrong in various ways, and that's a big complicated
well,
subject.
We should have an episode on that because I don't know, but
yeah. So anyway, what I wanted to get back to is, I guess it's this decoupling again of labor from value is a lot of what I'm trying to parse. And I'm thinking, this is where I go to basic income. This is where I go to, a lot of these questions are so urgent. They are absolutely urgent. Like, will AI, end up a lot of people losing their jobs, and real lives are on the line here, right? Will productivity just get absorbed, or can we choose to channel it in such a way through labor movements, union organizing, etc., so that people actually get to work fewer hours, that we have the 40-hour work week, we have the weekend, we stop child labor, like in theory, productivity can do that, but only if you make capitalism do it, right?
Right.
And
I would say we are way past the point, way past the point where productivity is the relevant consideration. Right. We are. It is absolutely a matter of power.
Yeah, and so so I think when where I see this coming up right now, right, with my students is they're English majors, they're graduating, they're wanting to have jobs related to writing in some way, a lot of them. Some of them are creative writers, and I tell them you may do better with a job completely unrelated to writing, so you don't use up all of your writing brain on writing reports, but putting that aside for the moment.
Or having long conversations with ChatGPT on how to write reports.
Right. So what I'm seeing is that, and I don't have statistics on this, this is very anecdotal and just a feel right now, is what used to be 4 writing jobs, doing things like writing brochures for pharmaceutical companies, has now collapsed into 1 editing job, right? And so that's a very material, immediate difference for my students. If 3/4 of my students now can't get jobs, that's very concerning.
Well,
and so, and this goes back to the, you know, like, I feel like there's a big slippage between, like, people are like, oh, this is terrible because it's stolen work and people don't understand the labor that goes into it, and lots of artist jobs are going to go away. And I think we should not conflate all these categories, right? They're all their own individual things that are relevant and important, but it's like the piece of it of some jobs are going to go away, and maybe a large percentage of jobs are going to go away. Maybe programmer jobs of certain types are going to go away. I don't know. Is that, to me, seems similar to the industrial age, to all of these other tech developments.
Sure, 100%.
So it's
well,
not.
And that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
As far as like, I think there's a danger. Look, I think the labor aspect of this is absolutely crucial and fundamental, and I really think to some extent we should all like the WGA and SAG strike was the best thing to happen around this, because to some extent it is a matter of like, something creates enormous value. Who gets to own that? Who gets to determine that? Is it the person who owns the box that it ran on? You know what I mean? That's like the amount of like wealth concentration that we've had over the past. So, but I think it's easy for people to get distracted, because the thing we fear is like as we said when we were talking about this episode, like, it'll take our jobs, and that's sort of like, there'll be no work, they won't hire any, which is like, well, that historically doesn't happen. Some jobs go away. Arguably, they're replaced by worse jobs, more precarious jobs, it's more that we should be thinking about the quality of what kind of job is, and what kind of work we think people should be doing, and what kind of things we think we should be doing, and how much people should have to do, that kind of thing. Because if we just, you know what I mean? Because to some extent, it's like, it's not really, what often happens is that it's not that a kind of job goes away, it's that the rights associated with that job go away. It's that rather than being a taxi driver with a license who owns a cab, you're an Uber person who, if the app tells you can work, right? And if the app decides its algorithm doesn't like you, all of a sudden you can't. And it's actually not that you're driving any fewer hours than if you were driving a cab. It's that you've been converted into like, you have less power, right? You've been disempowered. And so I don't actually think that, sure, there are plenty of cases where one editor will be able to do 10 or 100 writing jobs. I get phone calls with telemarketers where clearly one telemarketer is driving a whole bunch of bots that are using auto-generated voices, right? Like, yeah, certainly there's lots of multiplication, but then that's been happening, as you note, since 1800. Like, it used to be that a field that would be harvested by 1,000 people is now harvested by one guy controlling a fleet of tractors. Like, sure, but it's not like, and yet unemployment doesn't rise, and our working hours don't, and our working hours never sink unless we strike, right? Unless we organize, unless there's a political, we could probably, if we decided to just have a 3-day weekend forever, like all weekends are 3-day weekends now in America, I bet there's so much flab in the economy that just a bunch of bullshit jobs would be done less of, and nobody would even notice. We'd just have a day free, right? But
and we're seeing that in things like, the effect of the pandemic and remote work, and it made some things very visible that were not visible before, which has been interesting. And like companies, so at least some companies were like, we don't really need you in the office 5 days a week. We need you in the office 1 day a week. Is great. Come in on Wednesday and we'll do all the in-person stuff, and I think that's
I literally think a vast number of Americans are essentially, particularly before the pandemic, paid to like go somewhere and then be on Facebook. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I mean, I did some of that right after college, but with like secretarial work. But
and there's nothing wrong. And I'm not blaming them. That's literally how their day is structured. That's literally what. But it's just a weird thing for us to have decided we need to do. You could be walking in the park. We have to. There's a lot of having to pretend to work. Anyway, bullshit jobs is a great resource for that.
Or doing your laundry, right? So that's what what the remote thing has made possible, is people have realized, like, if I'm doing it from home, I can throw a load of laundry in.
Turns out I focus much better in meetings if I'm folding laundry. Anyway, but anyway, I don't want to underestimate the disruption. Or I mean, it's both. There's kind of like two sides. On the one hand, you don't want to just underestimate the impact on people who right now are in fact losing their jobs over this. And partly, like I was saying about the hype cycle, they're losing their jobs on false pretenses. They're losing jobs because the VCs are pitching the idea that you can replace all these workers, at which point all these people get laid off and there's all this instability and precarity. And in the end, when things settle out, there won't be fewer jobs. It'll just be that the owners have grabbed more power. That's what usually happens. And but that affects a lot of people who are, in fact, I mean, see people who are like, well, I used to have steady gigs doing, business writing, and now the people who would hire me are just telling ChatGPT to do it. And I expect to circle around and later be editing all the crap that ChatGPT wrote, but maybe nobody ever reads it, but the that's real. And on the other hand, I think it's dangerous to put that in a special category just because a lot of the complaints are very loud right now because it is precisely the people whose jobs are now getting precaritized are the people who write essays about things. Like that's right. Sure. Like it's sort of like they didn't, when they came for this group, I didn't say anything. When they came for that group, I didn't say anything. Now they came for me. It's like, well, when they came for the agricultural workers in the 1800s, you didn't say anything. And then, like then the factory workers and whatever. Now that it's essay writers, all of a sudden, all the essay writers are writing essays about the threat to the jobs of essay writers. Right. Well, but in fact,
this is very reminiscent of Gayatri Spivak's "Can the Subaltern Speak?" and the Orientalism by Said looking at the academy. Anyway, sorry, I'm gonna put all those aside. I wanna we have about half an hour left. I think we're not taking a break.
Oh, we didn't take a break.
It's okay, we're just going. Let's just go.
Yeah. We'll just go.
You've got a hard stop, and I do want to get to the teaching piece of it.
Sure.
And I think I'll get there in part by giving an example of, so what we've been talking about. I make flyers, right? I make digital flyers. I used to make print flyers. I used to do this very tediously. I would make newsletters and so on the desktop machine 30 years ago. It took me hours, right? Now I go into Canva, and I guess this is a plug for Canva. It works really well. And and I've had to make a bunch of flyers this last week for promoting my event and my launch, and each one took me maybe 3 minutes. This is not using AI. This is just the tools. And I think there is using templates, using, drag and drop kind of WYSIWYG kind of functionality and so on, that has made it all much easier. And it's a little funny to me that I have this bright line where Canva asks me, do you want me to design your flyer for you? And I'm like, no. And I will not talk to Canva yet because I am troubled by the ethical piece of it. And yet I'm not sure there's really that much difference functionally between how much my workflow has changed with the tech between now and what it would look like with AI, which I think is interesting. What's happening in the classroom right now, and I'm seeing this from two angles, right? Like, so I'm a professor at UIC, I'm on the school board at OPRF. And so on school board, what I asked for 6 months ago is, I said, you guys have got to come up with some AI policies, because otherwise what you have right now is your teachers are all going to be implementing them differently, and there's no consistency for the students, and it's not fair to them to have one teacher flunking them for using an AI program to brainstorm, and the other teacher being like, oh, it's fine, as long as you edit it afterwards. So they eventually did that. They have some policies around it now, but at the university, we do not have any consistent university policies. It is very much the Wild West, and university professors typically have a lot of autonomy. And I'm on some discussion groups for faculty, and one of the things I find troubling is how many of the faculty, it turns out, are in a very disciplinary mode with their students on this, and very, very angry about cheating. And I just feel like, I don't know, I'm not sure where that comes from. It's a large number of faculty. I don't know if it's a large percentage, but I suspect it's even a large percentage. And this to me is a sort of and I don't know if this is true country to country. Sometimes I feel like this is a very American thing to get really angry at someone who you perceive is getting something cheaper than you did or for free. Like this is our resistance to welfare, to, even programs like food stamps that generate more money than they cost, right? But people are reflexively against giving milk to mothers and infants. It makes me crazy, because it's someone's getting something for free, or student loan forgiveness, or whatever else. Like if I had to pay for it, you should have to pay for it. And when that comes into the teaching realm with the use of things like ChatGPT, it is, people get into this mode of like, I'm going to catch all the cheaters and I'm going to punish them and I'm going to flunk them. And it's getting really hard. And I have to spend so much time working on this now. And I'm not getting enough. No, this is like all the time.
Instead
this
of
is what I'm reading.
hunting.
Yeah. Like this is like, like they're all doing it and they're getting overwhelmed. And you'll occasionally get someone saying like, well, before this, I had people buying papers and there were, like Mama Toss writing papers for people to buy, which also I had some challenges with, but it made my job harder. But there's but there's been an escalation, right? And part of it is the muddiness, because again, like this is ChatGPT is being used in, so if the student also has a part-time job where they're being told to use ChatGPT and then they come into the classroom and the teacher's saying they can't, it's confusing, right? It goes back to that
or like if you're talking, you're talking more about like essays and creative writing, but consider programming. Like I think it's quite likely. I mean, a lot of people, when I started out programming, it was really important to remember things in your head. I knew all kinds of algorithms, all kinds of data structures, whatever I had memorized, because to actually, if I needed to use them and I didn't have, I didn't remember them, I would have to go find a physical book and open it and like maybe go to a library. As soon as Google came in, programming changed greatly. Like I know I cleared all that stuff out of my head. I don't remember the syntax of languages and everything, because I can find it in a second. And similarly, I think now a lot of people who are programming, they're just programming. I see a lot of people doing like projects where it's like they're just interacting. It's a conversation. It's not that it's writing it for them. That's not even a thing, because when you're programming, you don't even know what the target is. You've got to iterate, but you're asking it to do chunks, whatever. It's just like a tool. It's like part of your IDE. Yeah, exactly. So a class in which you're insisting that students don't use it is a good exercise, but maybe not actually preparing them to be professional programmers if in fact that's going to be the standard tool, right?
Exactly, right. And this is so, like it's this kind of question, like, is this the difference between knitting needles and a machine knitting tool? Is this, are they fundamentally different? Are they basically the same? And is this where the workplace is going? And I think, and I guess so I now, at the start of every semester, I basically, I always had a conversation with the students about plagiarism at the start of the semester, right? When they're not so much with the creative writers, they usually are excited to write their own worlds, right? But for my lit students, and I talk about, there was this, this guy at, I want to say Stanford, who was a professor there, and somebody went to go cite one of his papers and realized, looking at his stats, that he had submitted somebody else's paper for his dissertation, and so his university.
Sure, that happens all the time. That kind of scandal.
Well, there was a particular one where like they not only invalidated his degree, but they contacted every student he taught and said they were going to lose credit for the course because he wasn't qualified to teach it, right?
Yeah, and that's drastic.
So the students are often very upset by this, and I'm like, okay, but like imagine he's a doctor, he's teaching a medical class or a bridge building class or whatever, you're an engineer, like don't you want him to have the knowledge? Anyway, so we have.
Well, you do, but it's not clear that the students should be the one. The students who took the classes should be the one. And actually, it's the university. They should be suing the university, not the university taking away their credits. I mean, they were the one who were shortchanged.
I think the university. Well, the university's in a little bit of a bind. I mean, they can give them another class for free and not charge them for it, but if the students really aren't qualified to, like, you know what I mean? Anyway, putting it aside.
I mean, if it turns out the doctor wasn't qualified, you have to come in and we get a new liver because with the one he put it, the one he transplanted into you is.
Anyway, leaving this aside for the moment. So we have this conversation, but now I have it also in the context of ChatGPT, and I say, okay, let's have an open, no stakes, no, whatever. Do you guys use it? What do you use it for? Do you want to use it on papers? Do you think it's useful, helpful, et cetera, so on? And it turns out that at this point, most of my students do use it as a first step, as an idea generation step often.
Yeah.
And maybe not most of my students, but a lot of my students. And I get that. I have an essay that I have to work on that's due tomorrow that I have not started writing. It's 3,000 words. And I've been thinking about it. I'm pretty sure I know what to write. But there's that terror of the blank page, right? When I get off this podcast, I'm going to have to make myself sit down, open up a file, and start actually typing something, right?
Yeah.
And so I get and this is me with 30 years as a writer, professional writer, right? So there's something I think very valuable about anything that's going to help beginners get over their anxiety and go in. So that's the one piece of ChatGPT, and maybe Midjourney for artists, I don't know, but for ChatGPT, where I see a clear value, and it is potentially very exciting. The problem becomes, I have had students hand in papers that were clearly completely generated by ChatGPT, clearly in the sense of like, here's a paper that's supposed to be talking about 2 stories that we read this semester. And one of the stories is the one we read this semester, and the other one is a summary of a completely different Asimov story that I know, I've read it, but like not anything we covered. And has nothing to do, and it sounds like vaguely plausible as you're reading, and then it completely falls apart into incoherence. Like right now, you can usually tell the papers that were completely written by ChatGPT. I don't know how long that'll be the case. And it's, so I understand that the professor's frustration getting a lot of this and feeling like they have to police it. And we often have legal, like school requirements where if you're going to flunk a student for plagiarism, you have to have a conversation with them first, and which is totally reasonable. But if it used to be 1 a semester and now it's like 20 a semester, that's a tremendous amount of additional labor for the faculty. And very stressful labor, right? It is super upsetting to like talk to a student about whether they cheated, right? And so so I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about like, how do we navigate the fact that they're using this, and they're probably going to keep using it as long as it's available, while still doing our job of helping them learn how to write without it? I think it's kind of an interesting question, like, because so much of the writing process is also the thinking process, right? And this is, so I was on Our Opinions Are Correct podcast talking about this, and Charlie J. and Anders asked, but aren't they like, they're not going to learn how to write if they don't actually write, right? There's that line about like, you've got to write 1,000,000 words of crap, et cetera, so on. And I'm picturing a violinist who like never actually picks up their violin. They just put the, instructions into the machine. Maybe they can produce music on the machine, but they can't play the violin, right? So I don't know. I'm throwing all that out there. Well, like, part of the question is like, what is my job as an English professor? Is it about the thinking or the writing? And can I do the writing? Can I do the thinking even if they do? Can I teach them how to think well about stuff even if they don't write about it? I'm not sure, because so much of the writing is where for me at least, I actually figure out what I think about it, right? So, okay. Sorry, that was long. Any that
no, that's cool. I have plenty of thoughts. I don't know if I remember them all. One thing that's funny, and this occurred to me as you were talking, like, you're not gonna. I mean, you were talking about how it might be different in different countries. One of the things in Switzerland is that I just don't think. I think for different reasons, maybe also for the reasons you were saying, but for somewhat different reasons than the one you're saying, not the oh, I don't want anyone to get a free ride thing, but actually that's a reason that makes America sound miserly, and other nations sound more generous. But actually, I think on the contrary, one of the strengths of America makes it is kind of a problem here because Americans prize a kind of learning which is very sort of like from your soul, you're coming up with your own creative expression. A lot of things, even at the university level in Switzerland, are either well, they're either either they're involve a lot of memorization or they're a lot of thorough mastery and sometimes thorough analysis, but there's a lot of oral. Like you're generally expected to. I don't think it's going to be a problem with ChatGPT writing anybody's Maturarbeit in Switzerland because they'll just bomb the oral defense. You know what I mean? You're orally defending stuff in like 10th grade. You know what I mean? Like yeah. So I think that there are some, like, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I'm not necessarily seriously suggesting this, but I do wonder if part of what will happen is that just as a natural course of things, there will be fundamental restructuring of some kinds of learning activities in some sense going backwards. Like, for one thing, if you assigned your student, if you said we're going to write creative or we're going to write essays and handwritten, turn them in handwritten,
so
you can do it on ChatGPT and copy it down. But at that point, shouldn't you just might as well? Yeah.
So in America, you can't do that because of ADA. So it's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act to require handwriting. Basically, it's
even for people who don't have a disability.
Well, but enough of them would that like it would just be a disaster in any class that you tried it in, right? So like that was like, it was funny, like that was the initial response of non-teachers to like, oh, we're gonna bring back the blue books, and all the teachers were like, yeah, we're not, we're not allowed to, it's not gonna happen. And similarly for oral stuff in America, I have a lot of students have huge anxiety around oral stuff, and that's not protected in the same way right now. But I would never.
Well, but it's just, I mean, right, and it's a bit of a shock if they only have to do that suddenly in college. But like here, it's baked into the, you know what I mean? Like
right.
Just they've been doing it, so it's not, you know. I mean, at some point they have to do it. They have to do it for PhDs at least. You have to do an oral defense. But anyway, I don't know.
But not
maybe
goes
maybe
to the PhD,
not.
Right?
But I mean, maybe, I don't know. That's one of those things where it's like there are structures and they're not easily changed. But like, I don't know, is it really better for people to be running around policing rather than? I mean, you know what I mean? Rather than
so the kind of structure that does change. So I'll tell you like what.
Yeah.
I always did a lot of scaffolding, right? Where like if you're writing a paper, we brainstorm thesis topics in class, we do outlines, we workshop them, we workshop drafts. So they do a lot of the writing in class, and that was not meant to catch cheaters, right? Like that wasn't the goal. It wasn't to prevent cheating or anything like that.
Sure.
We do it because you get better writing as a result of walking the students through this process. And especially I do it in my lower level classes. I have not necessarily done it in the higher level classes, but that is like one thing that teachers are turning to, that even if they didn't do it before, they're doing it now, because it does let you get to know their writing style. You're working with them, you know. On Monday I'm going to be doing theses with my students, and I will be sitting with each one and saying, okay, what do you think you're going to write about? Show me your thesis. Let's discuss it. Let's revise it. Let's whatever. So that is a intervention that works. And I'm seeing science professors doing interventions that are very different, but are also like, the goal is to do more learning, right? Not to catch cheaters, but to do more learning. Right.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. So, but on the other hand, side of that is like I was saying about the programmers, it's like also not every context is one in which you shouldn't be doing these things, right? Like to some extent, it's sort of like we're at a historical moment where there's this sudden. So two things are going to happen. One is there's this sudden takeoff where all of a sudden we have these things and they're very dramatic and visible and obvious. But in fact, like you were saying about Canva, the reason it's asking you is because AI is hype now, and the VCs are pushing it, and they're like AI. At a later moment in the hype cycle, it's not going to ask, it's just going to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't know that you're using AI. We're using all kinds of machine learning stuff all the time. When I'm texting somebody, it does suggest the next word, and I often press the button. I'm not like ethically, do you know what I mean? Like, am I going to go take an ethical stand to the extent that I'm not going to pick the next word that the predictive text thing when I'm texting? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's going to seep this kind of, the general sense of machine learning is seeping into all kinds of things. And it's kind of like, look, if you're learning programming, I think there should be a class where you have to do assembly, by hand, so you really understand the machine and its registers, even though you're never going to program assembly, because that, if you're doing a computer science degree, teaches you something fundamental about how things, about one side of the spectrum of how computer programming languages work. It's instructive. And then I think there's another class where you're like supposed to use ChatGPT because that's like an important workforce skill. And I don't know if that's true in other contexts, but it's a little bit like if you're doing creative writing or business writing, there are different standards, right? And it's kind of like, how do you use these things? And also there's a huge difference between like having it spit something out and turning it in, which is going to be full of pitfalls, and you're in some sense cheating yourself, right? Versus, like you were saying, having something as an idea generator or whatever. Like, I mean, it's interesting that one thing that large language models specifically are good at is sounding like the median person. So if you are better than the median person and you just have it do it for you, it's going to be worse, right? But for a lot of people who are, it's a godsend for people who struggle with a business correspondence. Why shouldn't they do it that way?
It's also great for ESL, right? Maybe you're fluent in Spanish, but not in English,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So it's
right. And automatic machine translation is another thing that uses similar kinds of technologies, and that's absolutely crucial for all kinds of things. So I don't know. I think that when we're talking about, you were talking about sort of like people's own practice and like should, like indie writers using, being tempted to use Midjourney for cover art or something. I think there's an issue of like first of all, I just think there's increasingly a distinction between pro and fan stuff. Like there's a difference between doing something for your own amusement and exploration and like saying, well, this is a product and I'm sending it out, right? Like it's sort of like the idea that there are pro markets, right? That have a certain word rate, and that lets SIFWA say that there are SIFWA pro markets. It seems reasonable that SIFWA would, it would not be unreasonable for SIFWA to say that one of the things you have to do to be a pro market is not accept AI work, right? Because that's sort of like a field that is, you know what I mean? That's like a labor sort of thing. It's like saying we are trying to create this space specifically for this kind of work because, as we were saying before, like the natural tendency is to get all the power in the hands of a few people and for everyone else to be doing stuff that is work. They're not going to have the day off, but they're just doing work that is no fun. Right. We need to defend not just the idea of jobs, but of the idea of the quality of the kind of work we're doing, right? I think we kind of go in a wrong direction if we're like, I'm gonna lose my job. It's like, no, you're gonna get a shittier job. Like it's gonna be more alienated. What we should be fighting for is and that's what the WGA and SAG, I think, contracts really did well, is to fight for, we want to work and at the kind of labor that we think we should be doing. We should be doing the interesting human part, right? And that's a big piece of it, is it's like, how do we use automation or any technology to let us do the interesting, nourishing human part and have it do the part we don't want to do, right? Like, well, that's literally, we have people, I don't know. There was some funny comic about like the humans are working in the fields and the robots are like watching them with guns and talking about their poetry. It's like we have the robots writing the poetry and the humans, picking up the trash. And like that's a political decision that happened because of a bunch of, and we often erase the politics. We often feel like it's like, well, I don't know, it's just like the machine can do it. So, but we're not paying attention to like their, how the machine, like everything that's happening about the AIs right now is very much shaped by this specific like venture capital that's flowing into it and need for that to get a buyout. And you know what I mean? It's not like we're making global decisions anyway. So I think there's a distinction between, I don't think that like having a moral panic where we're like anybody playing around with Midjourney is, I mean, there's an environmental issue, right? One of the things that the VC money doing is suppressing the actual energy cost.
So actually, I don't know about that. So maybe can you do a quick breakdown
like
for people?
It's very expensive energy wise. Like just how every time Midjourney draws you a cool picture and you think, oh, that's neat, let me draw another one, and you have a session doing, that's a very energy expensive way of doing things. And it's that's sort of like the same way that Amazon sold everything for free until all the little bookstores, all the chains went away, whatever. Like that's suppressed, right? It's suppressed because there's all this money flowing in because people are not, like, they are spending other people's money. They're spending speculative money. They're paying for the energy bill to make you a cool picture of a dog with somebody's, I don't know, a dog in a tutu with on Mars. You're asking for a dog and a tutu on Mars, and you're not paying. They're not asking you to pay the energy bill. They're paying the energy bill because their VCs are giving the money because they're like, we can take over everything and everyone will do it this way, and then we'll pay it for it in the end.
So
but
hang on. I follow that.
Yeah.
But my question is this going to be like, the way computers were huge and now they're in our pockets? Like, is the energy cost going to go down with time or no?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, part of the thing is that like it's not like cryptocurrency. The thing about cryptocurrency is that it is energy, particularly proof of work cryptocurrency. No, proof of whatever. Yes. So the kind that Bitcoin is like the terrible kind where it's energy expensive on purpose. That's the whole point. That's like the most obscene. There are other cryptocurrency things that are not as bad, but whatever. They're all reasonably bad. With this, it's like, I don't know, maybe it could get cheaper, but it's almost like we could have been putting our energy, our human energy and thinking and money since the 70s into, like, what if we had decided to have Moore's law, except we equally privileged things being less energy intensive, right? Like, what entirely different alternate history technology would we have if that had been our priority? The only one place that it happened to some extent is in cell phones, because batteries, like, until batteries got better, what about they would try to use less energy, and then batteries would get better, and then they could use more energy again, and that's that like cycle. But like there's no, it's all externalities, right? There's all these negative externalities. We're floating on top of this. We're just like strip mining the planet so it's not becoming livable for human beings, and all of our right. So what I'm saying is, like, sure, it could be less energy intensive, but I haven't seen much efforts on our part in most areas, unless it's specifically regulated, like cars, I guess. Like there's more hybrid cars because there's, again, specific laws and stuff.
I mean, I think there's sort of there's two angles, right? A, is it going to be more profitable if they make it more energy? Because eventually they're hoping to profit, right? So if they're like at the point at which they are start charging us for this, they want their costs to be as low as possible, right? So there is a capitalist incentive to keep working on making it cheaper to do the thing, as well as the regulatory angle.
To some extent, there's an incentive if that does turn out to be the prohibitive money part. But I don't know. It's just like, yes, and in some sense I don't know. It's a good question what people's appetite will be. I mean, to some extent, it's like, search is also expensive, and like, just Google is energy intensive, and they have gotten better. Like, they have these vast data centers, and they're to some extent environmentally optimized, but of course they're also just growing, because it's like that. Yes, they have done a bunch of tricks to try to keep down their energy costs, not to the extent that they could if that was their top priority, because, for instance, they want to use commodity hardware. So they want to use, it's more important to be able to just throw away a machine. As soon as something's wrong with a machine in a Google server farm, you just throw away and plug in a new one. And that's energy waste, costly, but it's still worth it because it's too complicated to actually fix things, right? Like, they're still saving money in the end. And people just want more and more. And it's not like people are paying for search. Companies are paying for search because it's like ad money, and this, it's selling your data. Like, you know what I mean? And so it's like, I don't know, like, anyway, I think that is one ethical issue, is that this stuff is not free in energy terms. None of it is. Search also isn't. This Zoom call also isn't, right? But so I think with all that stuff, the question is, I mean, I just think we can be cognizant of that and somewhat sparing. I mean, I think it'd be kind of nice if people thought about their energy budget, their energy impact, the way that we were thinking about COVID risk budgets. You know what I mean? During the lockdowns, and when the lockdowns loosened up, I got into these spreadsheets where it's like, all right, I'm going to go to the store for this long, and I'm going to go to this one party where there's masks and we're outside, and that's this much COVID risk, and that's fair because I'm going to go nuts otherwise. You know what I mean? And I think if we were looking at things that way, like, hey, a Zoom call every couple of weeks, Marianne's really important. That's totally worth putting my energy ration towards that. It'd be nice if the planetary government would assign me an energy ration, and I could decide how to divide it up on the things that I care about. But in fact, what's actually not happening, that'll only happen once 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion people have died of famine, right? We're going to do that then instead of now, which is unfortunate. Anyway,
you could write Ben's dystopian story about that.
Well, I have been. That comes up frequently. I mean, there's an iteration in
so
Guy Works for Money.
Before we close, I think we're running out of time.
Yeah,
and we haven't satisfied anything, but hopefully we've raised lots of questions. I'm curious, you teach from the teaching point of view, like if you were teaching an English class and, class on Delaney or whatever, I feel like at this point, I would rather get, 4 bullet point ideas from the student that are actually their own ideas, that they're worked through some stuff, rather than, a prompt from an AI thing. And maybe they had to say the prompt, like, give me an essay about Delaney, sexuality, and class issues, right? In, Dahlgren, right? To me,
I mean, I don't teach in that kind of a setting, right?
Yeah.
Like what part of what you're talking about is this weirdly oppositional relationship when you're in a context where people are getting graded and the grade's important to them and they have a minimum amount of time. And so there's kind of like a competitive situation where they are trying to do as little effort as possible to get the grade, which is odd. That's an odd, like that's how all of our formal educational system is set up. And it's an odd thing. Like you say, I teach, I don't know, like, sure, at Clarion, why would anybody at Clarion, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no grades. They've saved and scrimped to get there. Why would they turn in something written by ChatGPT? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no incentive.
But I mean, you saw the RWA thing? Did we talk about this last time?
No,
RWA conference, Romance Writers Association conference, had a panel that they were advertising on how to use AI to write your romance novels. And
well, sure, but that you're selling for money. But I'm saying, like, I'm teaching a bunch of people who are like, why would they bother going to Clarion then if they were going to use their? You know what I mean? Like, I don't teach in a context where.
Well, but some of them are going to Clarion because they want to be best-selling science fiction fantasy authors. You probably could get. I mean, I think some of them probably would be very happy to have AI write most of their epic fantasy series.
But then why bother going to Clarion? Well, I guess for the connections. Anyway, I mean, sure, you could network. Yeah, if you're going to be sufficiently cynical, that doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's kind of first of all, that is a way, that is, I don't know if this kind of technology, the LLM technology, is going to, it's not good at good writing. It's not going to be good at good writing, right? It's not, that's not the direction. Like, it could get exponentially better at all the things it's tuned to do, and that would make it much, much better at writing like the median human writes. Like, it's not going to write like a better, because there's no better in the data set. There's no better in the data set. And there's no way to produce, as we said, the scaling problem means there's no way to produce better in the data set.
I know, but this goes back to like is it art or not kind of question, right? Like, some people are perfectly happy with craft, right? Like, they want, I mean, people are using ChatGPT to write and sell genre novels now, right? And readers are buying and reading them and are happy with them. So there's going to be.
Yeah, but I don't think that's the market where you need to go make. Is that the market where you need to go make connections at Clarion? Like, that doesn't, do you know what I mean? Like, yes, that by all means, turn them out and stick them on Amazon at the right price point. Why bother going to a con? Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem like the same.
I don't think you and I have the same opinion on this. So I don't think that the Clarion. You're a young writer. You love Brandon Sanderson. You want to write best-selling fantasy novels. You don't know what the path is to do it, and you've heard about Clarion, and I think many of them who get into Clarion would be very happy to have a program that helped them get to writing those best-selling fantasy novels faster.
But that's very different than saying that that you're gonna drop in a prompt and it's gonna come up with a best-selling fantasy novel, don't you think?
I don't know, difference of degree. But, and again, like, this is the RWA conference, I think, is a good example. They were having a panel on, like, we're going to teach you, just like we used to teach you how to, like, write good dialogue. Now we're going to teach you how to use AI to write good dialogue, right? And so I don't think they really saw a difference between the two, and they were surprised by the backlash and the anger.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. So no, I see what you're saying. And I think there is a difference between, again, I think there's a big difference between you. I think that it's thorny because the labor and political situation makes us want to position this as like a totally separate thing. Like in the extreme case of your student who did with the two Asimov things, where the person gave a prompt to ChatGPT and then printed out the output and handed it in without even reading it, like that very extreme case. But of course, that's very different than, you know, somehow being in a dialogue with it in which it gives you some cool ideas and then you go write a story, or writing something and asking it to critique it, or whatever. Like there's a million ways you could interact with it the same way you would with a writing partner. It's basically like an extremely knowledgeable drunk person who's from a different culture that you don't really, who you know what I mean? Like they're very fluent in English, but sometimes they say the weirdest shit because they're coming from somewhere very different. Like that's, do you know what I mean? So now you have a person like that in your computer. I don't know, like, I mean, there's a difference between saying where should SIFWA or a prestigious publisher draw the ethical line. Should they say, this was never, not a drop of AI ink was ever spilled. I swore off AI and deleted all my apps before I embarked on this project and only restored them once I had turned in the final draft of my editor. Like, is that the line? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or is it just like, you know, or is the line like, I went through and looked at all these words and decided they were the words I wanted, right? And, you know, do we require, are we saying, you know, like, what is the rule for, I don't know. It may be that this ends up being like photography, where it's just like some people write artisanally putting every word down, and some people use a little bit of AI to get started, and some people, you know, do, right? You know what I mean? Like there's some people, but it's not, but yeah, I mean, where is the line at which it stops being your work? And I think at the moment we don't, there is also that, but specifically with AI, the LLMs we have now are also like, as we said, like they just ripped off everybody's copyright. It's sucked in the universe. And then you're paying some people for it who went and pirated, you know, and grabbed all that, and they're the captains of industry. Like, and you know, it should be, if anything, it should either be public domain or it should be banned. I don't know, but I don't know. I do also think there's an issue of sort of, well, we have to wrap up, but I do think we have to think about it in terms of solidarity too. Like in some sense, it's like, you know, your person who you're saying they're making cover art, you know, they want to write their own book, but they are tempted to produce cover art. It's sort of like, I don't know. It feels like the ethical position is partly just transparency. I think in some sense, the ethical position is what's clearly unethical is acting as if you wrote it the old-fashioned way. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe what we need, as tools get better and better, maybe what we need is more of an accounting of like how I made this thing. You know what I mean? And maybe that's fine if you want to buy, if it doesn't bother you at all to buy, I mean, except the issue of like copyright and whatever. But if somebody, you know, used it as a brainstorming thing, I don't know, like, I don't know.
Transparency is good. I do think from the teacher point of view, I'm really interrogating like what is my job? And if my job is to help them think, and if I really think that them drafting it is going to help them think better, then I think I kind of have to make them do some drafting, right? Even if the end result they produce is not as polished or, you know, even as good as what the prompt generator will give. You know, and so,
but that would also be true if it were a painting class and you weren't allowing them to use photography, right? Like obviously they can't paint as well as the photograph, but
right. So I think that's it's going to be interesting
from
the teaching point of view, like seeing not all teachers think that way, right? So I think it's going to be interesting seeing how this shakes out in some sense. So, and like a commercial class versus, you know, like if you go take an Adobe Illustrator class on how to use Adobe Illustrator, right? They're not concerned with making you a better artist. They're concerned with showing you how to use these tools that we have. And they're kind of trusting you to be the artist, right? To bring the artist piece to it.
Which is fair. That's what the class is for.
No, it is fair, but I think it's interesting. It's interesting, like
it is interesting, and I realize that
it's like the goals. What are our goals? And what are like what pieces of it matter to us at any given point are, you know,
I mean, I think I've realized that I feel like it's very chaotic, right? Where we are right now is very chaotic, and I feel like just in my comments in the last 10 minutes, I feel like I'm swinging back and forth. I'm both very excited at the idea that we sort of take a stand and like I'm rooting for Ned Ludd to go destroy the looms, because of the context, of the social context, that it's like, well, these looms aren't just sort of abstract new equipment. You're specifically using them to disenfranchise a class of like trained workers who have skills, and to be able to bring in literal child labor in the looms that Ned Ludd was destroying. You know what I mean? We're all going to become vagabonds in the London streets, and you've taken all these people from orphanages and you're going to chain them to these machines. Like, of course, that's why I'm destroying the looms. So there's a way in which I'm all for, like, if the Supreme Court like banned it because all the stuff was stolen, that'd be awesome. At the same time, from the point of view of like the is it art question, or the like how do we teach with it question, I'm also like, I don't know, at the end of the day though, this kind of technology, not necessarily this robber baron stolen one that we got, but this kind of technology is just going to be something that we're in dialogue with as part of how we go in the world. And we need to value art as the communication between the artist and us. And as we said last time in the teddy bear episode, the artist is not just themselves. They are themselves and their social relations and tools and whatever. So, that's a much fuzzier, open-ended question. We're going to co-evolve with until the power runs out. until the hopefully at some point someone's going to ration my energy use and stop melting the ice caps. I sure hope that'll happen.
Like it's funny how you can go that route. You can also, what I was thinking earlier is like, God, it'll be nice when we can have technological developments, but have, kind of the Star Trek basic income, everyone has housing, clothing, and food, such that, and healthcare and education all covered.
Right.
And so that we can have technological advancements without people losing jobs that they depend on to feed their families, right? And I feel like that's
or more to the point,
possible.
having their jobs converted from jobs that feed families to jobs that don't feed families, because nobody's lucky. I mean, in a way, like as I was saying, I think there's a lot of losing of jobs. I think there's a lot of jobs becoming precarious gig work with no rights and no power and no collective, but or just much less interesting jobs. You're editing shit written by a computer instead of writing yourself is a very typical way that jobs become more precarious, and it's
I mean, I don't know that that's actually more boring than drafting. I mean, I've done tech writing, and it's super boring. So it was even more boring than writing porn. So but anyway.
I should go.
We've gone over.
We're wrapping up.
We hope that this rambling, whatever it is, has at least sparked. I don't know. Maybe people will get into big fights about everything we've said. Come at us. I'd love to get. I'd love to get emails
at us.
Yeah, and like
tell us why we're wrong. We might have you on.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Making a good enough case for why we're wrong, we'll bring you on the show.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. This is MRAH and Rosenbaum argument.
Bye.
Bye.